Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the Kansas House District 23 General Election Candidate Forum. We're going to be starting here in a minute. We're just going to give it about 45 seconds to a minute to allow people who are still probably logging in to get logged in and ready to go. And then we will get started from there. Thank you. All right, I think that is pretty good, so we'll get going here. Again, good afternoon and welcome. My name is Joe Riedel, and I serve as the chair of Shawnee Chamber's Government Affairs Committee, and it is my honor to be your moderator for today's forum. As we did in the primary election, we are hosting these forums this year in a virtual format, so please bear with us as we adjusted this method of providing you each with information to assist you in making informed choices before casting your ballot in the upcoming election. On behalf of Johnson County Public Policy Council, a collaboration of all 10 area chambers of commerce, and particularly on behalf of the Lenexa, Overland Park, and Shawnee chambers, thank you for attending our forum featuring candidates for Kansas House District 23. I would also like to thank the sponsor of our governmental affairs program in Shawnee throughout the year, Evergy. So the format today, which is the same for all of our forums, will be as follows. We'll begin with a 3-minute opening statement by each candidate, followed by a moderated question and answer period, during which each candidate will have 1.5 minutes to respond, and then closing up with a 2-minute closing statement. The format, questions, and time limits will be the same for each candidate, and due to time constraints, there will be no follow-up questions or formal rebuttal time. Candidate speaking order has been randomly determined with the candidates, and we will rotate throughout the program. So in advance, we will be starting in the order of Susan Ruiz, Matt Clark, and Jeff Shull. Questions have been prepared in advance by the chamber staff based on member input and have not been shared with the candidates. If we have time to, we will attempt to answer any questions that might be submitted via the chat function in Zoom. So with that, let me now introduce the candidates in the general election for House District 23. This district includes parts of Lenexa, Overland Park, and Shawnee, is bounded approximately by Schweitzer, Farley, and Moody Park Drive on the east, 71st Street on the north, Flum and Nolan on the west, and 95th, 98th, and 99th Streets to the south. So, first up, Susan Ruiz. Susan was elected to the Kansas House of Representatives in 2018. A native of Houston, Texas, Ruiz is the daughter of a Mexican-born immigrant father and a Texas-born mother, giving her a unique perspective on multicultural issues. A licensed clinical social worker, she holds a master's degree in social work from Our Lady of the Lake University in San Antonio, Texas. As the first openly lesbian legislator ever elected in Kansas, Ruiz has gained national attention, having been featured in the Washington Post twice. She was featured during Women's History Month as one of the area Latina women making history. Received the You Go Girl Award from the Greater Kansas City Women's Political Caucus, and in 2020, an award from the Kansas Mental Health Coalition for exemplary leadership and collaboration. So welcome, Ms. Ruiz, and thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you to everyone out there.
Ms. Ruiz, we'll go through the introductions real quick first. Okay, thank you. Next, we have Matthew Clark and his wife have lived in Overland Park since 2013 and have a 1-year-old daughter. In high school and college, he was active with Habitat for Humanity and helped start chapters at a college and several high schools. An airline pilot, he volunteered for a program called Jet Express, where he was a driver for senior citizens and served for 3 years as the hotel committee chairman for his airline union. So Matt, welcome, thank you. And third, we have Jeff Shull. Jeff lives in Lenexa and was a law student from 2017 to 2020, interning at Project for Innocence, Johnson County, and with the Kansas legislature. He previously worked as a firefighter, paramedic, and clinical technician. So same thing, Jeff, welcome and thank you for being here. So now we'll move into the opening statements for the candidates. Once again, you each have 3 minutes to present your opening statements. As we discussed earlier, and for those joining in, Dustin with the Shawnee Chamber will be holding up cards to represent when you have a minute, half a minute, etc., to close out. So with that, Ms. Ruiz, again, you're up first, so go ahead.
Thank you so much to everyone that has taken the time to listen in. I want to first of all thank the Shawnee Chamber, the Governmental Affairs, and for Evergy for your sponsorship for this event. Again, being able to express our views regarding so many of the important topics to the people who live and work in District 23. And so I proudly represent you right now as your current representative. I was elected in 2018 because many of the constituents who voted for me and who I spoke with when I was knocking on doors said that they wanted Medicaid expansion. That was their #1 request. And it didn't matter if the person that was asking for it already had health insurance. They understood the need for Medicaid expansion. They also wanted, a second topic was to fully fund our public schools. And we were able to continue that. Another issue was our voting rights, and so that Kansas can continue to be able to vote and not have pockets of our population disenfranchised. And the fourth topic is that we wanted equality for all. And you know, the Kansas has a non-discrimination act, and we wanted to be able to expand that to include sexual orientation, gender expression, and gender identity. Those are the 4 main topics. Those continue to be our 4 main topics from what some of the people in the district continue to tell me and say that we need to continue to do that. And as we'll talk, I'm sure, later on about our economic future and how Medicaid expansion is so important to that. As a clinical social worker, it has been a very important thing for me to be able to talk about mental health in the committees that I have been assigned to. And the Children's and Family Services, and in the Social Services budget, and in the Veterans Committee, all 3 of those committees focused on mental health and the need for us to have more access to mental health services. Again, Medicaid expansion would help to expand those services, but because my background, 27 years as a clinical social worker, has been in mental health, and specifically working with people who have a severe mental health illness. And so I've been able to talk about those issues in committee, and that's been a very important thing for me.
Okay, thank you, Susan. And next up, we have Matt Clark. Matt Clark, you have 3 minutes.
All right, thank you everyone for having me, all the different chambers hosting this event. Again, my name is Matt Clark. I live in Overland Park with my wife and 1-year-old daughter. We've been in the Overland Park area for 7 years, the Kansas City area for about 9 years now. And it would be an honor to be able to serve as a state representative for the area. I am running as the Libertarian Party's candidate for District 23, and I'm really excited to give the voters that choice this year. This is the first time in the district's history that there's been a Libertarian candidate on the ballot. So it is a new choice, and I appreciate everyone taking the time to do their research on me and what the Libertarian Party is about. So the things that have really driven me to step into the public arena, I never really saw myself doing this. Man, 10 years ago, I could barely speak in public, and I barely can now, but I'm working on it. It is criminal justice reforms are my real passion area. And I chose to participate in this as part of the Libertarian Party because they have been fighting consistently for these criminal justice reforms since before I was born. They've been very consistent on these issues. So something that really kind of sparked my passion last year was seeing, instead of finding ways to release people from our state prisons that don't need to be there, we shipped over 100 inmates to a private prison in Arizona. Our criminal justice system is heavy on punishment and kind of light on the justice aspect of it. So I am proposing ideas like full legalization of cannabis. I understand medical will likely happen first, but I just don't think it's worth locking people up for anymore. A lot of probation and parole reforms could help reduce our prison populations and increase the availability of people in our workforce. So cutting maximum probation lengths in half, eliminating state-imposed fines and fees to be on probation or parole. All these things are things that would make our justice system more just and would also lower the state spending on criminal justice in the courts with law enforcement. And the more we lower spending, I want to see that turned into lower taxes. So thank you so much for having me.
All right, thank you, Matt. And last up here, we have Jeff Shull. Mr. Shull, go ahead.
Thank you. First, I want to thank the Chambers for supporting this event. I know it takes a lot of effort to get all of us candidates organized and together, so thank you very much for that. Just a little bit about me. I was born and raised in Lenexa. I've lived here almost my whole life, excluding time when my wife was getting her master's and when I was going to undergrad when I lived in Lawrence. My first career out of college was for medical sales for a local company. And while I was doing this medical sales job, I knew I wanted to help the community on a day-to-day basis. I wanted to make that my career. So I went to night school to get my paramedic certificate and then became a firefighter paramedic. And so I had a total of 5 years as a firefighter and a paramedic between volunteer and full-time. And I was just bugged by some of the things that were happening in our community where I thought, hey, I really want to do more for this person than drop them off at the hospital. I want to do more than just be there in that moment of crisis. I want to follow them through and help them see so they can get to a better life. And so I decided that the best way for me to do that was to go to law school. When I went to law school, I interned for the Project for Innocence in the Johnson County District Attorney's Office. And while I was the DA's office, I did mainly child needed care. Now I work for a nonprofit where my predominant role is assisting survivors of domestic violence. And through my entire career path, I've realized that a lot of what's going wrong can be fixed in Topeka. And so I want to be a representative so I can continue that path of helping people, to go to Topeka, to see the problems that I saw as a firefighter and address those problems, to see the problems that I saw through the Project for Innocence and through the District Attorney's Office, where we really need better laws to be able to serve both aspects of the defendants and the prosecutor's office. And also, domestic violence laws in the state need to be modernized. So I stand for a few things. Education. I went to Shawnee Mission schools. My mom worked in Shawnee Mission schools. My grandma worked in Shawnee Mission schools. My wife worked in local schools. My daughter will go to Shawnee Mission schools. There is nothing more important to me than ensuring that we educate the future of our community. And I have that huge tie to Shawnee Mission. Criminal justice reform. I also believe in criminal justice reform, but I phrase it as we're incarcerating the wrong people for the wrong amount of time. I think we need to modernize some of our laws. And there's problems where domestic violence being one, where if you abuse your spouse, it's only a 5-year look back. So there's cases I would see where they've abused their spouse 6 times in 30 years and are still being charged with first-time domestic violence. And then healthcare. I think we need affordable healthcare for every one of our citizens. We need affordable, quality healthcare. And so I'm going to go to Topeka to be your representative. I'm going to go to represent the people who I grew up with this community. When I go to doors, I don't only knock on strangers' doors. I walk into old coaches, to high school classmates, to parents who were in scouts with me. And those are the people I'm going to represent. Thank you for your time.
All right, thank you, Jeff. So on to the question and answer period. And we're going in a little bit different order this time. So question 1 is going to go to Matt Clark first, and then Jeff, then Susan. So, and I'll repeat these questions with each person. But question number 1 to Matt. What do you see as the top 3 business policy issues facing the state of Kansas in the coming year?
3 big business policy issues I see. Number 1, keeping government from banning certain industries. Vape industries are at the top of that list. That came close to being banned, effectively banned last year when a proposed ban on vaping flavors almost went through. So let's not ban businesses that are out here trying to get people off of cigarettes. I'd like to see legalization of new industries. Like I said, I would definitely like to see the full legalization of cannabis, not just medical, but I understand medical will likely be a stepping stone. in Kansas on the way to full legalization. I think sports betting ought to get its way through, so we can generate new business industries in Kansas. And then across the board, just preventing any tax increases. You know, as we face a big budget shortfall, the temptation is going to be pretty high to increase taxes on individuals or businesses. And as the economy struggles, I think people and the businesses need to be keeping more of their money, not less.
Okay, thank you. And well done with the time. Just want to give a quick reminder again that each person will have a minute and a half to answer these questions. So next up, same question, Jeff, and I'll repeat it. But the question is to you. What do you see as the top 3 business policy issues facing the state of Kansas in the coming year?
I think the majority of them are going to stem from COVID. I think a big part of small businesses' fear is how can they continue to pay their rent, to pay their employees, and stay in operation when the COVID has changed the economic reality of the situation. I think that, you know, early on in March and April, I think a lot of us did the go buy local gift cards, so you can kind of give them almost a loan to try and make it through this rough patch. And I think that now we're to the point where some businesses have reopened and some haven't. And so we need to ensure that they can stay afloat, be able to pay their rent, be able to pay their employees. I also agree that the way we're controlling who can access what business is going to be a huge policy going forward. There's local businesses in our community that were serving the public 6 months ago, 7 months ago, and no longer can do it because of COVID. And some of them would like to still continue trying with safety measures in place, but haven't been able to. And so I think we need to be able to allow people to make the choice if they want to safely go to businesses. And third is, what do you do to convince people it is safe? So we have hopefully a vaccines on the horizon. I do think it'll be into 2021 before that's distributed to the community. But how do you get people back in place and back into supporting small businesses?
Okay, thank you. Susan, and again, I'll repeat the question. What do you see as the top 3 business policy issues facing the state of Kansas in the coming year?
The pandemic has just really has impacted the state as it has, you know, the entire U.S. And it is right now. It is what is in our face. It is the one thing that we're going to have to address during the next session for sure. And the pandemic impacts health issues, economic issues, and we need to address it in a nonpartisan way. Another thing would be our tax structure. Our tax structure, I believe we need to relook at that. We need to relook at that in a very nonpartisan way, because we need to strike a balance between property sales and our income tax. I think those two for sure would be the most affecting our business policies right now at this moment. Needing to lower, of course, the food sales tax is another issue that we'll need to face.
Okay, great, thank you. So on to question number 2, and first up, Jeff, you will be first. Question number 2, how would you propose to balance the state budget? What specific budget cuts would you support, and what revenue enhancements would you consider, if any?
I've always said we need smarter government spending. I think when you look at education as one, where we've increased it 44% since 2005, that money has not made its way to teachers. Their salary has not gone up 44% since 2005. That money has not increased in the classroom. The budgets in the classroom not gotten 44%. So I think the biggest thing we can do is look at all of our budgets and say, how can we spend this in appropriate manners? I also think that the best thing we can do for our budget is to recover from COVID. I think we need to get our businesses back to work. I think prior to COVID, prior to March, we had, you know, tens of millions in surplus in the budget, and there was a debate if we were going to spend it or give it back to the citizens. And so I think if we can continue that economic rise, if we can focus on getting people back to work, we won't need to raise taxes. I also think that legalizing sports gambling is a way that we can bring in extra revenue. And I've said before, but I think that when you look at ways to cut, so every person we take out of prison is $25,000 a year to our budget. So I think when you look at cutting people's incarceration rate and using that money to fund other programs and to focus on our economic recovery so we have more money to spend on what is essential.
Okay, thank you. Susan, back to you. How would you propose to balance the state budget? what specific budget cuts would you support, and what revenue enhancements would you consider, if any?
The revenue enhancements that I would want to look at is, again, the pandemic is going to be the number one issue that we will have to face in the next legislature. And if we're going to look, instead of right away looking at budget cuts, we need to look at how we can enhance our revenue. We've got two areas that we can enhance our revenue so quickly. And again, it's going to take a nonpartisan and cooperation from all the electeds to be able to do this. We have got to legalize medical marijuana. I would like to see all cannabis just legalized, period. What we have seen are all the states all around us have already legalized cannabis, and they are seeing revenue. We need to look at that. We need to look at that right away as soon as the next legislature convenes. We also need to look at gambling and what are the kind of revenues we might be able to gain through that. We need to continue to take advantage of the fact that we have wind in Kansas and to be able to enhance our energy through the wind. And we're leading the country in that, and that's another area that we need to continue to do. If we can legalize cannabis and look at the gambling, we can start lowering our food sales tax.
Okay, thank you. And to you, Matt, how would you propose to balance the state budget? What specific budget cuts would you support, and what revenue enhancements would you consider, if any?
Thanks. Criminal justice, everything starts and ends with criminal justice reforms for me. Again, that's my passion area. So there is so many reforms that we can do to reduce the prison populations, which creates direct savings there. I mentioned the cutting maximum probation lengths in half, so not just the prison population, but the supervised release population. I know it's a long stretch, but we couldn't even do it with cannabis last year in the 2020 session, but reducing all other drug possession offenses down to misdemeanors so that we're treating addiction. We're not putting people in jail for 5, 10, 15 years over drug addiction problems. We are just hemorrhaging money in that respect. We're facing a massive budget shortfall next year. There's no way around it. So I think just a statewide spending freeze would be appropriate. No increases in spending just across the board as we work through, so that we don't go in a lot of debt in the coming session as we try to enhance revenue, like I said, like Susan and Jeff said. So hopefully through full cannabis legalization, legalizing sports betting, legalizing other aspects of betting, because we're somewhat limited on our gambling, our legal ability to gamble in Kansas. Those are the big things for me. I'll leave it at that.
Okay, thank you, Matt. So to question number 3, and this will go to Susan first. What would you do to grow up and develop the state's workforce?
One of the things that will continue to strengthen our workforce is for us to continue to fully fund our public schools. That also means colleges and universities. They impact our economy. We often forget about that, but they very much impact our economy, and they produce a lot of our state workforce. The other piece is to pay attention to small businesses and to our chambers, city councils, anyone who is talking about what kind of workforce does a particular city need, and to be able to address that. We need to push for skilled trades jobs, which, so that, school guidance counselors can then work with our trade unions and maybe the chambers or the city councils to look at what kind of workforce does your particular city need. And there's so many skills trades out there that need apprentices. There's a lot of skills trades that need to be filled. And that would be a really good way of being able to fill those positions. We need healthcare workers. We are in dire need of healthcare workers in Kansas, but it's all over the United States. We have got states all around Kansas who are hiring some of our healthcare workers because they can pay them more. And they're taking our healthcare workers and going into other states. We really need to look at that. And again, work with our colleges and universities to be able to have students that are able to fill those jobs.
Okay, thank you. Matt, same question to you. What would you do to grow and develop the state's workforce?
To grow and develop the state's workforce, I would start with, I don't speak too well on occupational licensing reform, but we've touched on it a little bit in the last decade in Kansas, but I think we can go a lot further. So if elected, one of my first contacts will be the former Libertarian state senator from Nebraska, Laura Ebke, who helped champion some really good occupational licensing reform, making sure that those licenses are open to people with a criminal record as we work to kind of reduce the amount of people with criminal records in the state, and to just get rid of a lot of occupational licenses that are just unnecessary, anti-competitive, and just free up the state a little bit in that respect. I think one thing that the schools could do to help prepare people for jobs that are available, and I've thought this before COVID, it's really been amplified with COVID, is making sure that the schools are offering more full-time online learning options. So many jobs out there in the industry, especially the tech field, are online. And so not just having this kind of one-size-fits-all public school system, but making sure that within the public school system, there's still some choice on how you learn and what topics you learn in high school.
Okay, thank you. And Jeff, do you want me to repeat the question?
Yeah. Oh, sorry.
Okay. What would you do to grow and develop the state's workforce?
So I think that growing and developing the state's workforce has to be done with what is going to be the most employable in 10 years. So when you grow our workforce, I think it does start with education. It's finding how to push people into career paths that we're going to need the next 10, 20, 40 years down the road. That's investing in STEM jobs and STEM careers, and that's having students have options to pursue those in high school. I also think we need to create an environment that makes it competitive to stay in Kansas. We don't want my generation leaving. My generation has had a history of saying that we're going to go try and find better paying jobs out of state. We need to build an economic environment in which businesses want to build in Kansas. You know, living in Johnson County, I think we all know that we can lose businesses across the state line very easily if we don't stay competitive. And so I think when we build our workforce, we have to make sure that, one, we educate our citizenry properly. We need them educated in the careers that we're going to need down the road, not just the careers we need today, but we need to look to the future. And then we need to have an environment where people can hire them. Also, as a person who's kind of worked in both fields, where I've worked white collar and blue collar jobs, I think we need to do a job where you can do a trade and get a 4-year degree at the same time. I think that someone like an electrician or a plumber, if they could get a 4-year degree as the background of as an accountant or a business administrator, they would have so much more of an opportunity to run their own business and be successful as an entrepreneur. And that's the kind of thing we need to be looking to do in the future.
Okay, thank you very much. And so with that, we can move into question number 4. And Matt, you are up first here. Can you share with us your views on K-12 funding?
K-12 funding. Man, it is a massive portion of the state budget. So I know what the Constitution says is that we shall provide suitable funding for the educational interest of the state. Boy, I tell you, I'm still trying to wrap my head around why the courts get to decide that instead of the legislature. That just, I need to still do more research on that, frankly, but that's the ruling. So we have to provide the funding that the Supreme Court said we needed to provide. At the same time, if we're facing $1 billion plus budget shortfall, we have to be realistic about this and not go into debt that our students who are in school are going to have to pay off in 20, 30 years down the road when they start getting elected in the state legislature. So I guess my main area is criminal justice reforms. But the one budget-friendly option that I would really push would be that online education, full-time online education options. I think I remember that being like almost $4,000 per pupil less cost than in-person education. I work with, in the airline industry, I work with people from all over the country, and so many people have their kids prior to COVID were doing full-time online school and getting their schoolwork done in 3 to 4 hours. And it's just a cheaper option as well. So I think that would really benefit the budget
Okay, thank you, Matt. And next up, Jeff, repeating the question. Can you share with us your views on K-12 funding?
I think K-12 funding is vital to a vibrant Kansas economy. I think that an educated citizenry is what will propel us in the future. I think every dollar we invest in education is going to bring us more tax revenue down the road, as long as we couple that with a competitive business environment so they can stay here after being educated here. I was a graduate of Shawnee Mission Schools. I'm very proud of my education. I was also a graduate of Kansas Public Colleges and Kansas Public Law School. I realized how vital that was in my life, and I know that people need that in order to be successful. When my daughter will go to Shawnee Mission Schools as well, and when I want her to go through there, I want her to have as quality of an education or better than I did. And like I said, I think one of the big things we need to do with K through 12 spending is make sure we're spending it in the right ways. I talked about how we've increased it nearly 50% in 15 years. That's not making its way to teachers, and that's not making its way to the classroom anymore. We need to figure out where we went wrong so we can be judicial with taxpayer money and support our teachers and support our classrooms. There's no reason we can't do both in the state. I also think we need to bring back local control of school budgets. Shawnee Mission, where I went to school and where this district lies in, it gets bottom 10 percentile in state funds. That's one of your flagship districts getting bottom 10 percentile. That's unacceptable. We need to bring it back so we can control the funding and we can properly fund our K through 12 schools.
Okay, thank you, Jeff. And now to you, Susan. Can you share with us your views on K-12 funding?
Yes, I want to make sure that we will continue to fully fund our schools. I also would like to see teachers get due process. They don't really receive that now. It is at the foundation of really our country, of our state, is that our public schools be given the chance to teach our children to the best of our ability. It's unfortunate that we've got so many disparities between districts. And I know I represent Johnson County, but as a representative, you also represent the entire state. I want to continue to fully fund our schools. I am not supportive of taking public money away from our public schools and putting it into school vouchers. I will not vote for something like that. I've already voted against something like that, and then I will continue to do so. I don't want to see a constitutional amendment to move away from the Supreme Court oversight of the state education funding. I think we need to continue to do that, mainly because it needs to be continued to be equitable. And the legislature has enough problems trying to pass so many other bills that I don't have a lot of confidence that we can fully fund our schools without having the Supreme Court.
Okay, thank you. And moving into economic development, Jeff, you'll be first up on this question. What type of economic development policies will you support to encourage job growth and business expansion in Kansas?
I spoke about this a little bit earlier, but we need to make sure that we're investing in the economies of the future. I think a lot of that's through tax incentives to have those companies come to Kansas. Wind energy is a big one. We have an opportunity to build windmills. We also have an opportunity to actually construct the windmills here. We have plants in Wichita that were making planes that are no longer making planes because of the economy and because of some of the issues they had. There's an opportunity to have those plants repurposed to be building windmills, to incentivize them to start investing in other economies. We need to make sure that the jobs of the future, the STEM jobs, the technology jobs, the engineering jobs are here in Kansas for the time to come. We need to look forward to ensure that every person who wants to stay here can find a good paying job. And we also need to make sure we support our core as we develop. Kansas is an agricultural state, and there's a lot of good paying jobs that go along with supporting that industry. And we need to make sure that they have access to those jobs. We also need to, as I said before, ensure that our environment remains competitive with the area. It is too easy to push someone out of the state through high taxes and overregulation.
Okay, thank you. Susan, same question. What type of economic development policies will you support to encourage job growth and business expansion in Kansas?
I will support economic development and focus on job growth and small business expansion that is local, equitable, female, and minority owned. We need to look at our tax structure to strike a balance between property, sales, and income tax. And again, that is only going to be able to happen if we have a nonpartisan view of looking at this tax structure. We need to continue to fully fund our public schools, and including colleges and universities, again, because they have the ability to help train our next workforce. And so being able to fully fund our public schools, colleges, and universities is number one.
Okay, thank you. Next up, Matt. Repeating the question, what type of economic development policies will you support to encourage job growth and business expansion in Kansas?
So I don't have a lot of details on specific economic development programs, but just as the libertarian idea of taxes is just as low as possible, the same for everyone ideally. So it's challenging. It would be a challenge to do that, but I mean, my ideal world, we would just have such a low tax rate that people would just want to come here anyway. That we don't have to give out these special projects for this industry or that industry. That would be my ideal. But anytime I would vote or look at special economic development programs, I would try to make sure that these are not excessively long. Programs that keep the taxpayers on the hook if something goes wrong for 10 years. COVID's just a perfect example of how we just don't know the future. Try to create a good plan, but the world always has a different plan for us. So I don't want such long-term commitments or long-term tax breaks. Just keep them low all the time would be my preference.
Okay. All right, question 6, and this one to you, Mr. Ruiz, first. So what are your views on healthcare policy and Medicaid expansion in Kansas?
We have been trying to expand Medicaid for several years now. And in 2018, again, I mentioned this earlier, that, there are over 150,000 Kansans right now that are without health care and are, a way to pay for their health care, much less have access to health care. There are people who are having to choose between, do I pay my rent or do I buy food or do I, go see a doctor? And if you have healthy parents, you have healthy kids. And so it's also an economic issue. If we look at some of the clinics and the hospitals that have already closed in parts of Kansas, and being able to have Medicaid expansion would again allow people to be able to have access to that health care. But it also brings jobs with it. And that's the thing that a lot of people don't realize, that it will bring jobs. You'll have doctors, you have nurses, you have techs, you have social workers, you have therapists who can come and also give therapy and mental health services to those people that are in need. And so we need to expand Medicaid. We need to do it right away as soon as the next legislature convenes.
Okay, thank you, Susan. And next up, Matt, same question. What are your views on healthcare policy and Medicaid expansion in Kansas?
So the way I see healthcare costs is just decades long, prior to Obamacare, decades and decades of government intervention in the healthcare and health insurance industries that have created this giant web of regulations that only a few giant companies can comply with. It suppresses new competitors into the industry, and this lack of competition is what is driving up healthcare costs. So Medicaid expansion just addresses who pays for that cost. It doesn't address the costs of healthcare. And until we begin to dismantle this giant web of excessive government regulation in this industry, again, I'm not against government regulation in the healthcare industry. We definitely need some. But this web of anti-competitive regulation is something that needs to be dismantled if we truly want to lower the cost of healthcare in total, not just who pays for it. And then Medicaid expansion is paid for, I believe 90% was last I saw, 90% is paid for by the federal government. I always have to write this out just to realize how big of a number that is. The federal government is almost $27 trillion in debt. We have to stop spending so much money. We just have to stop spending so much money.
Okay. And Jeff, same question to you. What are your views on healthcare policy and Medicaid expansion in Kansas?
So when I was a firefighter paramedic with Medicare and Medicaid patients, I found that diabetic patients were common users of the systems. When they would have a diabetic emergency and we would go to their house, start an IV in their house and revive them, they would get a bill for that. If we went to their house while they're unconscious, loaded them in the ambulance, drove them to the hospital, we would revive them on the way to the hospital, drop them off at the hospital, they would get a hospital bill. The only way they were covered by Medicare or Medicaid for that entire process was if we went to their house, picked them up while they're unconscious, transported them to the ambulance, started the IV in the back of the ambulance, gave them sugar, and when we got to the hospital, they had to sign a refusal. That's the only way it was covered through that entire process. I can remember going into one house where the gentleman's wife was begging me not to start an IV because they couldn't afford it. We need to find a healthcare system that allows everyone to have access to quality healthcare and quality healthcare they can afford. We need to address the problems where if you have health insurance, you shouldn't be hit by surprise bills. If you're trying to pay for something on your own, you should know what it is. And individuals paying for healthcare on their own should pay the same that insurance companies pay. I don't know if any of you have ever looked at a bill prior to going through insurance where it says what it is, what an individual will pay, and the discount when the insurance company pays. It's absurd that we have a two-tier system that makes our healthcare unaffordable and restricts who has access to care.
Okay, thank you. And so moving on to the next question, Matt, we're going to be starting with you on this one. And so what are your views on the state tax policy?
I don't say this a lot, but I feel like as a libertarian candidate for the first time talking in a public forum about state tax policy, this is where I'm supposed to say taxation is theft. But anyway, no, taxation is necessary. That's not going anywhere. State tax policy, we have above average taxes, above average property taxes, above average sales taxes, above average income taxes. We are extracting so much money from the residents of Kansas. And just how we ever got to this point where we're going to tax your income and then you have to pay additional sales tax on the already taxed income. I don't know, but it almost feels as maybe the sole libertarian member of the legislature, I won't make much progress on that front, but I will support any way that we can reduce taxes across the board in Kansas. The tax burden is too high. There seems to be bipartisan support. I try to make that tripartisan support for eliminating the state sales tax on food and groceries. That seems to be the most likely starting point for reducing taxes. But again, I want to reduce spending on top of it. I do not want to continue to put our future generations in further debt.
Okay, thank you. And next up to Jeff, same question. What are your views on the state tax policy?
I think moderately high is an understatement for a lot of people. I think the food sales tax is very high for a lot of people. I think that that we do need to focus on lowering the food sales tax. It's the second highest in the nation. We also need to focus on property tax. Out talking to people, that's one of the most consistent concerns, especially for our senior citizens, is I'm worried about my fixed income not covering my property tax. We were out campaigning and ran into a gentleman who was 92 years old and was mowing lawns to cover his property tax because his fixed income no longer did so. We are taxing our citizens too much. And prior to COVID, we knew it because we had a budget surplus. We're close. We need to figure out how to be equitable to everyone. We need to figure out how to ensure that we recover from shutting down the state and from the COVID, the economic crisis it caused, so that we no longer need to tax our citizens so high. We need to focus on ensuring that people on fixed income, senior citizens, can afford groceries and can afford to stay in their homes. Sometimes these people have been in their homes for 50 years and their tax bill is now higher than their mortgage payment ever was. We need to ensure that it's transparent how taxes are raised. Now, Johnson County had a recent issue where they tried to increase home values to have a de facto raise and say, we're not raising the mill levy, we're just increasing everyone's home values. We need transparency and we need to have smarter tax policy.
Okay. Now, same question to you, Susan. What are your views on state tax policy?
You know, part of the reason that our tax policy is such in shambles is because of the Brownback experiment. That increased the state taxes, and the revenue loss was like over 700 million, and we've not really recovered from that. And I've already mentioned this too, that I really do believe we need to find a balance between property sales and income taxes. I'm a homeowner. My property taxes are high, just like everybody else, and it is a struggle to pay for that, especially on a representative salary. So it is difficult to be able to pay for our property taxes, but we have got to find a way to find this balance between the three. It makes economic sense for us to do that. And again, we need to lower the food sales tax. We had proposed a way to be able to give like a rebate to those on fixed incomes, and for people who had disabilities regarding their food sales tax, and that didn't go anywhere. So we are going to have to address this. It is imperative, and really the people of Kansas are demanding it.
Okay, thank you. And moving into the next question, Jeff, we're going to be starting with you on this one. Just quite simply put, what do you believe most distinguishes you from your opponents in this race?
Kind of said in my opening statement, but it's my ties to this community. This is where I've lived my entire life. This is where I've gone to school. This is where I was in, Boy Scouts. This is where me and my wife decided to make our homes. This is where she's lived her entire life. I think that when I go represent this community, I'm not just representing it as constituents. I'm representing it as teachers who have had grown up. I'm representing it as scout leaders, as friends, as coworkers, as family. It means so much to be able to help those people. That's why I set off to do this. Is I want to ensure that those people who helped raise me, and it does take a lot of people that have those impacts, and be able to ensure that they have that great Kansas that I grew up in. I want to ensure that my daughter can grow up in the same supportive environment that I did. I want her to have a good education. I want her to be able to have a good job. I want her to be able to stay in Lenexa and have a good education and a good job. I was I went through public schools here. I went through public colleges at Lawrence, and then I went through law school in Lawrence. And the ties, going back to the ties, my grandma worked in Shawnee Mission schools. My mom worked in Shawnee Mission schools. And my wife worked in local schools. This really is my community, and I feel personally connected, and I want to represent those people.
Okay, thank you, Jeff. And next up, we'll go to Susan. What most distinguishes you from your opponents in this race?
Well, as being the current representative, that experience of since 2018 gives me an advantage in the sense that I have built relationships on both sides of the aisle. And those relationships are important. Being able to build a coalition, being able to work together on committees, and being able to bring, looking at our budgets, but also being able to bring bills together that we can all be happy with, and to help make the lives of Kansans better. That is important. To be able to have to start all over again it just pushes us back. The only way we are going to be able to have economic relief is for us to be able to address the pandemic, and it's going to take a lot of collaboration for that to happen. I'm a social worker, and there are way too many legislators who are lawyers or business people. They don't have the healthcare background, but yet are making decisions regarding medical issues. We need more people like me, and we need teachers also to be in the legislature. Representation matters. I'm a Latina, and District 23 has a lot of minority populations. I represent them, and they have told me this. So I know that this is true. I'm also gay, and so as being one of the first lesbian legislators ever elected to the legislature, representation does matter.
Okay, thank you. Now on to you, Matt. What do you believe most distinguishes you from your candidates, the other candidates in this race?
What distinguishes me most is that I've rejected the main two parties. I'm trying to bring a new party into the mix in Kansas to represent some views that are not currently being represented by the Republicans or the Democrats. People that just kind of want their biggest concern, and a lot of reason why they don't vote is they don't think that the main two parties represent them. We're the party that trusts our constituents to regulate their lives better than I could ever regulate it in Topeka. I want to get elected. I'm out there bugging people every day so that I can go to Topeka and leave them alone. So I mean, that's just the biggest difference, is that I would like to reintroduce, instead of a nonpartisan or bipartisan language, let's go with a tripartisan language. So often, not necessarily with our incumbent Susan, but so many legislators in Kansas just won't work across the aisle just because it's the other side of the aisle. I think my platform in particular, I have a lot in common with Democrats and Republicans on various issues, and I hope that I can be that bridge to help bring both parties together and pass some meaningful criminal justice reforms and lower tax policies.
Okay, thank you. And that actually concludes the formal question and answer period here. There were a couple questions that popped up in the chat, but I think with a stop time of 2:30 here, I think we're going to need to move on to the 2-minute closing statements by each candidate and then wrap up. So with that in mind, we'll have Susan first, then Matt, then Jeff. So starting with Susan, 2 minutes, closing statements.
Thank you, everyone, for taking the time to listen to us. And I hope that you also reach out to me. And if there's questions that you would like to have answered, please reach out to me, and I'd be happy to talk with you. I was elected in 2018 to represent you, and I have proudly represented you. I hope that you believe that too. We need to continue to work. We need to work together. We have got to pass Medicaid expansion for Kansas, for the 150,000 people who are out there that need access to health care. Many people believe that we need to fix the current system before we pass Medicaid. I think that's a cop-out. I think we need to do both, and we can do both. But for the 150,000 people, for us to say that to them isn't right. So that is something that we need to continue to do. I hope that I will be able to push that for Medicaid expansion. We need to continue to fully fund our schools. We need to work together in order to recover from this economic disaster that the pandemic has brought on to us. But at the same time, we need to look at positive areas in the state, and to look at how can we generate revenue instead of looking at budget cuts. I will not be agreeable to budget cuts to our schools, but there's revenue to be had out there, and we need to focus on that. Let's look at the positive side of that and see where we can increase our revenues versus cutting our budget. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Ms. Ruiz. And next up, Matt Clark.
Well, thank you again for having me. It's been a pleasure as I do my first live public forum. So voting for the Libertarian Party for Kansas, you'll know that my priorities are going to be those criminal justice reforms, to make the justice system more just, to lock in people that don't need to be locked up, to save the state money that we don't need to be spending in the prison, basically a prison industrial complex, I can say that. Vote for me because I trust you and your business to make the best decisions for you and your business. If there's any regulations, overburdensome regulations that you feel are hampering your life, your business, plan to introduce a slew of bills that repeal laws, that repeal regulations. That's what so much of my criminal justice platform is getting the state out of the way of people trying to succeed when they're in prison, trying to succeed when they're on probation, when they're on parole. I'm not terribly familiar with what type of regulations outside occupational licensing might be restricting people in Kansas, but that's what the Libertarian Party is about, is getting government out of your way so that you can thrive.
All right, thank you, Matt. And last up here, Mr. Shull.
So I think the three issues we talked about the most tonight were education, healthcare, and criminal justice reform. And I'm the best candidate to address all three of those issues. Education, my mom was a Shawnee Mission school teacher. I grew up in Shawnee Mission schools. My daughter will go to Shawnee Mission schools. I literally lived the life that we're legislating. I was affected by the decisions of the legislator. My family was affected by the decisions of the legislator. I know how to address the problems in schools, and I know what they need. I've already started reaching out to old teachers of mine and saying, what can we do? Healthcare. 5 years, I was a firefighter and a paramedic for part of that time. At 3 o'clock in the morning, I was running into houses where people were having cardiac arrest. I was taking these people to the emergency room. I was having continued contact with their doctors and their medical personnel. I understand the billing system that we were using. I realized how important healthcare is to our community, and I realized the impact of quality healthcare versus poor healthcare. Again, I've already reached out to my former fire department, and I had a meeting with some of those guys to say, hey, what can I do for you going forward? Criminal justice reform. I have a law degree. I interned for the prosecutor's office and the Project for Innocence. The Project for Innocence was overturning wrongful convictions. I went to prisons and I went to these people's families' homes to talk about how the justice system had wronged them. I learned what we could do differently and how we can improve from that side, but also from the prosecutor's office, where I saw victims who weren't being served because of the laws that the legislator had written. I saw that we could affect these people differently. And if those are the three biggest issues that we've talked about today and the three biggest issues facing this community, I am the best candidate for this race. Thank you.
All right, well, thank you all. And with that wrapped up, that's actually going to conclude today's forum for the Kansas House District 23. Thank you to Susan, Matthew, and Jeff for taking the time to be with us today. And definitely thank you to our sponsor, Evergy. Today's forum will be available to view along with all the other races in Johnson County on the JCPPC website at votejoco.com. And many of the candidates have completed candidate questionnaires that can be found there as well. And let me close by reminding viewers of a few key dates. Advanced voting by mail begins on Wednesday, October 14th. You may return your ballot in Shawnee at the drop box located at the Shawnee Library, 13811 Johnson Drive, or via the U.S. mail. Advanced voting in person begins on Saturday, October 17th, and you can cast your ballot in Shawnee at the Oaken Field House, 20200 Johnson Drive. General Election Day is Tuesday, November 3rd, and polls will be open from 6 a.m. to 7 p.m. And once again, thank you so much to all three of our candidates for being here today and for everybody logging in online. We know we'd rather be having this in person, but I think this turns out pretty well, and thank you all for showing up. And with that, I'll just ask one more time, get out there, vote, and thank you for joining us today.